Be Well Texas helps people who are struggling with the use of alcohol or drugs. They offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere in Texas. Find help for you or a loved one today.
Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Call 888-85-BE-WELL.
Welcome to the Republic of Football podcast. I am your host, Carter Yates, and joining me in Lewisville, Texas, after braving I-35 traffic is senior writer Mike Craven. Mike, it's good to see you again.
Nice to be here. Nice to get here through I-35. Every time I think I've worked on my temper, I drive on I-35 and realize I have to start over.
Yeah, so much more work to do when you drive on that road. So we have a little bit of show programming notes for you guys. You've gotten to know me and Craven on the Sunday show doing us, the two-man wolf pack, but you've seen us in studio every Tuesday with Mallory Hartley as our producer and Ishmael Johnson as our host. We've done a little reorganizing at Dave Campbell's. Mallory Hartley is a full-time recruiting analyst working with Greg Powers, so snaps and claps to Mallory Hartley, and Ishmael Johnson is our social media director. And both of those have so many responsibilities that we have to say goodbye to them, unfortunately, on the show. And for now, it'll be me and Craven coming to you live on off-season during Wednesdays-ish from StreamYard, and then Sundays during the season. But this will probably be our last show in studio, Craven, because you're an ATX guy. And so you don't have to roll up I-35 anymore.
Yeah, no I-35, which is nice. Get to stay in Austin, so I appreciate everybody's flexibility for sure.
Yes, and it's good to be back. I know we had to reset after last month and do some in-house housekeeping things, but it's a new era for the Republic of Football podcast, and it's a new era at Sam Houston and Rice. Craven has been boots on the ground at both those colleges, checking in with the new coaches. We're going to start with Rice because that story came out today. Mm-hmm. Craven, you went to see Scott Abel and found out that, Rice hired him because they wanted a unique offense from a coach who also has experience winning at prestigious academic institutions. Mike Bloomgren, the old head coach, had been at Stanford before, which is a prestigious academic institution, but didn't run that funky offense like Abel's going to run.
Yeah, he's been at Washington and Lee. He's been at Davidson. And for those who don't know much about those two schools, they're very high academic schools, right? Like Washington and Lee, one of the top D3 schools academically. Davidson, probably the top academic school in the FCS ranks. So he checked a lot of boxes just on paper. Scott Abel was a guy who, I think Tommy and the guys at Rice wanted to go look at. But I think for him, it's about winning. He had a quote in the story where he's like, I'm here because I've won. It's not because of my coaching tree or who I'm attached to, or, I've been in the NFL or coached for Saban or coached for Pete Carroll. He's just won everywhere he's been, and he's been a head coach since he was 27 years old. And then I think that'll ingratiate him in this state is he was a high school coach for a long time. 15 years he was a high school coach. He planned on being a high school coach his whole career. Then an opportunity came out that he wanted to go do the college thing like 17, 18 years ago. So just a longtime head coach who's excited to go through Rice. And I'm excited to see the offense. Like, this is such an air raid state. Mm-hmm. Like, the Mike Leach influence is still here. You got Dykes at TCU. We can go down the list, right? But this is going to look different. This is going to be shotgun option. A lot like what Liberty runs with Jamie Chatwell. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun.
So new offense, but a lot of the same returning pieces from Bloomgren's tenure, not doing a whole roster overhaul. How do you think that's going to give them a bit of an advantage going into the season first year with Abel?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like, at Rice, you can't do it that way. You know, you can't go find 40 guys in the transfer portal that you can pull into Rice. A lot of the players at Rice are there for other reasons than just football. So you don't want to run those guys out, right? And you don't want to go find, outliers that can fit into your program. You're going to have to do it organically. You're going to have to do it through the high school route. He's recruited Texas a lot, so I think he's fine with that. But this year, I would imagine it doesn't look full bore Scotty Abell offense. He's going to have to square a peg, round hole it a little bit here, and do what he can with the roster. He said something along these lines that we'd have to look it up. New coaches over the last 4 or 5 years, it's probably been the least amount of roster turnover of any program in the country.
And you mentioned he has recruited Texas, but not a Texas guy by trade. How do you think he's acclimating to the Lone Star State? Because we saw in December, so in one day he goes to Buc-ee's for the first time. Right. Then he hires John Kay, the state champion head coach at Galena Park North Shore, who was the linebackers coach before. And I also saw he offered Cade Spradling and actually got Cade Spradling to commit. He was the star quarterback linebacker from Smithson Valley, and that's an offer. That's a Texas high school football fan offer right there. So how do you think he's acclimating?
Yeah, I think elevating John Kay to defensive coordinator and keeping a person that's so well respected and loved in this state, and specifically in the Houston area, was a great first step. I think his experience as a high school coach helps him a lot in this state. We've seen it with Joey McGuire. We've seen it with Jeff Traylor. There's like instant credibility there. You can speak their language. You know what it's like to be in a community and play with the guys that you have in that community and what that means to people around. And so I think he has a lot of advantages. He checks a lot of boxes in this state, but the only way you can do it is just to go everywhere. I was there a week and a half ago, and when we were done with the interview, he was waiting out traffic, and then he was driving to Dallas to go to Allen and a couple of the Duncanville and a couple of the places up here you have to stop. When he went to THSCA after he'd done Buc-ee's, he went to a couple Austin and San Antonio area high schools. So you just do it step by step. You just get on the ground, you start meeting the high school coaches, you start shaking the hands, and John Kay is a good Sherpa for how you have to kind of navigate those waters.
So what are still like the biggest offseason priorities you think for Rice? We were talking before we hit record. We don't really know who the quarterback's going to be. AJ Padgett, the Reedy alum, is still there. Does he fit in that shotgun triple option offense? What are some big offseason priorities you think they still need to find out?
I think it's all about roster. I think it's all about figuring out what you have, what you don't have. There will be a second spring window, and again, it's Rice. You're not going to be able to pull in 15, 16 guys, but maybe there's 4 or 5 guys out there you can identify that can come help at some spots that you need. So far, they've brought in mostly help in the trenches, some help in the secondary. But after spring ball, after these next few weeks of being in the weight room, they're going to know if they have a quarterback on roster that can run this offense, and if their option is going to be, do we go find somebody who can run this offense, or do we run a different kind of offense? They do some RPO stuff. They throw the ball around. It's not complete 1990s Nebraska stuff. But they do want to be a run team. I think like 7 of the last 10 years, like they've led the nation in rushing. So they want to run the football. They want to find somebody who can orchestrate that. But again, I don't think it looks exactly how they want it to in year one. It's going to be a slow burn for them. But the next step up is just continuing to learn what this roster is. He had 82 meetings his first day on the job. Like he's met with the roster. Running. I think he's gotten to know the guys on the roster. Now he needs to learn what they are as football players on the roster. And that's something you just can't do until the bullets start flying in spring.
So I don't know if this was the first time you talked to him in person or not, but probably the first extended sit-down talk with him. What was kind of your biggest impression of him as a guy and a personality?
He's a confident dude. He's the youngest of 3 brothers who grew up on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania. He was the starting quarterback, shooting guard, and catcher on his high school teams, and so
decent.
He's used to having the ball. I think he likes that. I think he likes the spotlight. Kind of has some Willie Fritz to him in this way, in that he's kind of, he conquered the high school in Pennsylvania, right? He was state champion. He could have just won a bunch of state championships. He was at one of the premier high schools there. Then he gets to D3 and he does really well there. He gets to FCS. He does really well there. I think there's this sense of, can I go do it at this next level? He's 55 years old. Like, hey, this is going to be my final stop. Let's go prove that this option can work at places outside of the FCS and D3. So he feels like a confident guy. He played Major League Baseball for a couple years. He was drafted by the Royals. Just a big sports dude who, I think is going to fit in well within the state, and we'll see if it turns into success.
So successful first stop for you, Craven, at Rice, and then you also took a trip pretty close by to Sam Houston, the Conference USA. They said goodbye to Casey Keeler, obviously not a guy who was fired, but took the Temple job after a 9-3 year, remarkable year at Sam Houston. They replaced him with Phil Longo, who was the offensive coordinator from 2014 to 2016. Had a lot of friends near Huntsville, likes to vacation at Lake Conroe, knows the donors and the athletic director, and they're going to bring him back this time as a head coach. What was your biggest impression sitting down with Phil Longo?
He's a serious guy.
Okay, so we got confident and serious.
Right. Phil's pretty much just about the football.
That's that jersey in him.
And I've known Longo because I'm obsessed with the Mike Leach tree. I'm an air raid guy. I was in high school from 99 to 03, right? So like everybody started running the air raid. It's just an offense that's really changed the trajectory of football in the state and what it is. We saw the two quarterbacks of the Super Bowl, two top picks in the NFL draft from the quarterback position are going to be Texas. So I've known Longo and known about Longo because of that tree. In like 96, 97, he said he went to a camp at Kentucky when Hal Mummy got there and just slept in his car and listened to Mike Leach talk about football for 3 days and just became an air raid guy. So you can imagine what the interview was mostly about when him and I were sitting there talking. And I think Sam Houston knew with the obstacles ahead of them, they are still trying to transition to an FBS program monetarily behind the scenes. They are redoing, half of their stadium, and they are likely not going to play at Bauer Stadium in 2025. They needed a familiar face who understood those challenges, wouldn't bail at the first sign of a red flag. And I think it helped Longo a lot. That he knew Bobby Williams, that he knew those donors, and he had stayed in touch over the last 7-8 years since he had moved on from Sam Houston. He hasn't really been a head coach at this level before. He was a head coach for a couple years at LaSalle, but that was a long time ago. Mostly been a play caller, going to call plays at Sam Houston. But they are starting from scratch. Like this is we just talked about Rice and having 82 meetings and keeping most of that roster and trying to build it with the guys who were already there. Sam Houston's starting over. Basically a real year one as an FBS program, and I think that's the challenges up against Phil.
So the air raid offense he coordinated at Ole Miss, North Carolina, most recently Wisconsin. We talked before we started recording, and I don't think this is unfair to say, like, Phil Longo probably doesn't get this job if not for the familiarity he has at Sam Houston. But why could Longo be a really successful hire, you think, for Sam Houston?
Because of the state he's going to be in. You will find a dearth of quarterback. Like you can find the guys to run that system in college in this state. There's wide receivers everywhere. There's quarterbacks that can run it. He just got a transfer that he recruited from the Woodlands to come back.
Maybe Matauer, yes, sir.
Yeah, and so like he's going to be able to find quarterbacks. He's going to be able to find receivers, and he proved he can put an offense in Huntsville that puts up a lot of points. Like he knows the lay of the land. He knows his bosses. He knows his donors. He knows the talent. He knows the high schools around him. He told me there's 2 states that he doesn't need a GPS to get to high schools in. One is New Jersey, which is where he's from, and the other one is Texas, because he's recruited here so much. Because when he was becoming a Mike Leach disciple, he'd go to Lubbock. He would come into the state all the time for coaching clinics and to get to know the high school coaching and recruiting. So I think his familiarity and the system he runs lends itself to success in the state.
So you mentioned that Scott Abel at Rice was taking 82 meetings his first day. Did you sense that same sense of urgency from Longo?
I don't think it was about keeping as much of his same rock, because I think the difference is Mike Bloomgren got fired in the middle of the season to where they could get Abel there by early signing period. Mm-hmm. Like his introductory press conference was like the 19th or 20th or something. Like he was already in place. He was already recruiting. He was already keeping his players out of the transfer portal. There was 18 or so days between Casey Keeler leaving for Temple and Phil Longo getting that job. And in those 18 days, every single day they were getting worse as a program because they were losing another player or two to the portal. And so by the time Longo got there,
the entire defense was gone.
There wasn't 82 meetings to be had, right? He would have had to meet with some just students and stuff. There wasn't 82 football players on the roster to meet with. And so I think his challenge is heavier, at least in year one, because of the stadium stuff, because of just the flux, but also because he was hired later. And in college football now, the longer that these players can get into the portal, the worse you're going to be in year one.
So I know this is an unfair question to ask, but what is his biggest offseason priority other than all of them at Sam Houston right now?
Yeah.
It's just transition, guys. It's a transition right now.
Yeah.
Still transition to FBS. Longtime head coach just left. Phil Longo has got a great offense. We know he can scheme up the offense, but as the head president of this program, what's he kind of need to do?
I think it's getting the staff right. The longer I do this, the more I realize that the main job of a head coach is to surround his football players with talent as well. Right? Like, we talk about the recruiting, but when you look at the head coaches that are successful, they hire really well. They don't have a lot of turnover. They get their coordinators right. They develop football players. I think for first-year head coaches, that can be a challenging deal. Like, do you hire a bunch of your friends that you've known forever? Do you go outside of your tree? Do those guys get poached after year one? We've seen Willie Fritz have to replace both coordinators, one by choice, one by getting left for more money. And so I think that's it for Phil Longo. Is you haven't been a head coach in a long time. You've only had to kind of lead one side of the football team. How do you go about putting together a defensive staff and recruiting those guys and kind of being the CEO of a program? There's typically a learning curve with that.
Any other fun nuggets from your sit down with Longo? I'm sure you knew Longo better than you knew Abel because he's from Sam Houston a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I knew a lot more coaches that knew Phil Longo. That's the thing about Scott Abel is like he's a little bit of an albatross in the state. Like he doesn't know a lot of the coaches here. A lot of the coaches don't know him here, and so it's a lot of meet and greet stuff where I think Longo can hit the ground running. The difference is Abel's roster is a little bit more intact. I think that gives him a little bit of a leg up in year one.
So that'll wrap it up for Craven's coaching stops that he took early in this winter. Now let's shift ahead. Look forward to the next year. Do a bit of an off-season check-in. I know we were gone for about a month. We're going to do some buy and sell on programs. We each picked one program we're going to buy, one program we're going to sell. I'm going to start here with Texas Tech because I'm buying in because they've bought in. I just saw ESPN's Max Olson came out with a story today. Texas Tech spent $10 million in the transfer portal this offseason. I think the biggest areas of improvement for them that they needed to make were on the defensive side of the ball. I know this is bad podcasting, but I'm just going to read off some of the guys they got in that secondary because it was the last ranked pass defense in the FBS. We have 6'4" cornerback Terrion Grant from Purdue, 6'1" corner Bryce Pollock from Mississippi State, 6'1" corner Amir Boyd Matthews from UTEP, 6'4" cornerback Dante Balfour from Charlotte. Guess why I'm reading off all their heights is because we thought Texas Tech lacked a lot of length in the secondary last year. My big sleeper surprise guy, 6'4" safety Cole Wisniewski from North Dakota State. Craven, what do you think of me buying in on Texas Tech right now?
Yeah, I like it. They're clearly all in. I love what they did at coordinator. Bringing Sheil Wood in as the defensive coordinator from Houston was a great hire. Mac Leftwich, the offensive coordinator from Texas State, I think another great hire. We had talked about this when it first happened, right? Like if I could have picked two young coordinators, in the state that I thought were really exciting on each side of the ball, like those would have been the guys. And so I think they've gotten better from a coaching standpoint. And I think they've absolutely gotten better from a talent standpoint. You talked about the defense. They've also brought in, 2 or 3 instant starters along the offensive line. They brought in an edge rusher from Georgia Tech, a big defensive tackle from Central Florida. They see the Big 12. They saw what Arizona State did last year. They saw what BYU did last year. Why not us, right? And so Joey's going into year 4. They got a quarterback with experience. Like, this is when you go try to make a push, and, credit to them for doing it.
Well, you mentioned Arizona State and BYU, and I almost put, hey, I'm buying in on Texas Tech because of their schedule they have this upcoming year, but I'm not even going to do that in the Big 12 because it's so topsy-turvy, and you never know who is going to go from worst to first like Arizona State did last year. But Joey McGuire, he's kind of becoming the Texas Thanos a little bit, getting Mac Leftwich from Texas Tech, Sheil Wood from Houston, those coordinators. Maybe the biggest coaching front office acquisition was just retaining James Blanchard, the general manager. Notre Dame was in hot pursuit of him after making the national championship game. What do you think of James Blanchard staying in Texas Tech?
I think it's another statement of intent, right? Like, Tech isn't going to lose because of money anymore. And Had I told you 10 years ago somebody turned down a Notre Dame job to stay at Texas Tech, you'd be like, what? Are they from Lubbock or something? Like, is their daughter in school? Like, why would they do like? And now with NIL, with the transfer portal, with the money Cody Campbell, John Sellers, and those guys are spending at Texas Tech, like they don't have to take the back seat to anybody. And I put in the story like black gold is more important than blue blood nowadays, right? And like Tech can be at that table, and winning the Big 12 gets you entry into the college football playoff. And so it's allowed, maybe you don't have the chance to win the national championship. I still think there's only 6 or 7 programs that can really win a national championship year in, year out. But I think it's allowed programs number 10 through 25 to have like a real big shot. And TCU Tech is spending like one of those programs and has for the last couple of years. Now it's time to see like the fruit of the label. And I think the James Blanchard hire is just another indication of like where Tech's trajectory is, and that you don't have to be at one of those traditional schools to have success anymore.
And he's built up such a good reputation as a portal recruiter. I'm curious for you where you think they've taken the biggest step in terms of their roster from last year to this year. I'm going to start off and say the defensive line, because you mentioned the 4-star transfer Romello Height from Georgia Tech, 4-star Lee Hunter from UCF. I was digging into the numbers. Their top 3 tackles for loss leaders from 2024 weren't on the defensive line. They also haven't had a guy with over 7 sacks in the Joey McGuire era. So edge rusher was a necessity for this team because they have not been rushing the quarterback well. What's a position you think is improved the most?
Yeah, I'll take offensive line. I think getting Howard Sampson in from North Carolina, gives you a left tackle. And we've talked about this ad nauseum for years. They were always a decent run blocking football team. They've been bad in pass pro. They've had offensive tackles that were probably guards playing tackle, and you're just not going to get away with that, even in the Big 12. But Hunter Zambrano is another player that can play offensive tackle or guard. Will Jadis from Maryland is a player that can play offensive tackle. And so I remember right after the season, I texted every head coach in the state, like, hey, what do you need in the portal? What are you going to be looking for? And the clear answer from Texas Tech was offensive line. They needed to get better. They need to protect Baron Morton. They're not going to have Taj Brooks to just eliminate some of that stuff anymore, where it's like, hey, break tackle, and go get an extra 3 or 4 yards. Like, they need to be a physical football team. You mentioned the defensive line. I think they've improved excellently there, even in the interior. But I think the offensive line has gotten a lot better too.
What's your opinion of Baron Morton coming back this year at QB? I think, judging from the office, I'm probably lower on him than a lot of people. Like Greg Powers says, our recruiting analyst, whose football opinion I trust wholeheartedly, he might be a sneaky first-round draft pick next year. He's got that upside, that arm strength. I've always kind of seen him as, and I don't say this is an insult, a game manager. But sometimes, like in the Colorado game, I say there isn't that next step where you need your quarterback to go win you that football game. Not saying this year he can't take that step, but what are your thoughts on Baron Morton coming back?
I'm probably more in line with you. I don't know if I see Baron Morton as a first-round draft pick, second-round draft pick, one of those guys that's going to go like win you the Big 12 because he's just that guy. I think everything around him has to go well, and he's kind of more of a bus driver type. But that's 98% of quarterbacks in college football. Like, there's not many of those guys that can go like win you by themselves in the margins, just throw you to championships. If Quentin Joyner and the running back room, Cam Dickey, can continue to run the football, like they're going to take a step back running the ball just because they don't have Taj Brooks anymore. But if Baron Morton in the passing game can take an equal amount step forward, like offensively, I'm fine with Tech. Will Hammond's a great backup. Like I think offensively, I don't worry about Tech. It's going to be what that defense is, specifically the unit you talked about at the very beginning, and that's the secondary. If we look back and Tech doesn't reach their ceiling and doesn't compete for a Big 12 championship, it'll be because they busted on their secondary additions.
But I know there is a quarterback who you believe could lead his team to a Big 12 title just on his shoulders, and that's going to tee you up for your bye.
Yeah, by the time you're listening to this podcast, I may or may not have a column out on it. I think Baylor's going to be really good, man.
You're all in on the Baylor Bears.
I have red-pilled myself into like really, because every year I've been here, there's been a team that's kind of come out of virtual nowhere to go do something big. It was Baylor in 21. It was TCU in 22. Probably SMU obviously last year. Texas, we kind of expect Texas to be good. I think this year's version of that could be Baylor. They won their last 6 regular season games last year. Both coordinators are back, and that includes Dave Aranda calling plays defensively. Sawyer Robertson at quarterback, Bryson Washington at running back, Josh Cameron at wide receiver. Find me a better trio. Like, that is like one of the top, and they have Ashton Hawkins coming back. They've had a couple other pieces offensively. 4 of their 5 offensive linemen that were starting come back, and the guy that's going to replace Barrington at left tackle has started 10 games before in his career. Like, offensively, year 2 with Jake Spavital, like, offensively, Baylor is going to look incredible. If they can just be good on defense, like solid to above average on defense, and they've used a lot of their money to kind of add on the defensive side of the ball. Like, I think Baylor is a legit contender for the Big 12.
And here's the thing, on defensive side, I'm going to bet on Dave Aranda all the time. The thing I'm curious for him in year 2, though, is does he find a balance between being the head coach and being the defensive coordinator? Because I don't think he found it ever in 2024. The ESPN sideline reporters were talking about him drinking 7 cups of coffee a day and sleeping 3 hours a night. What do you think about their personnel on defense? Do you think it's better personnel to get what he wants to do done on defense? And specifically, I'm looking at the passing defense. Oregon safety Tyler Turner coming over. Northwestern safety Devin Turner, Frisco Lone Star alum, I think should be an instant starter. Caden Jenkins, maybe a bit of a bounce back here. He was a freshman All-American. What do you think about the personnel on defense?
Yeah, Calvin Simpson-Hunt from Oregon's probably going to start opposite of Jenkins at corner. I really like their nickelback, Carl Williams, when he's healthy. He's been a really good football player. Their safeties have a ton of experience. The biggest question I have, they added the Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year at linebacker to start next to Keaton Thomas, who I think is the most underrated defensive player in the state. Like, Keaton Thomas is going to play 10 years in the NFL. He is absolutely. When Gary Patterson's like, that dude's going to have a long NFL career at linebacker, like, he's going to have a long career at linebacker. It's edge. Steve Linton, like, the producers of edge last year are gone for Baylor. They brought in a Tulane transfer. They've kind of gone in the transfer portal to figure that out. They're going to have to, like, if you tell me the edge production is good, I think Baylor's going to be the Big 12 champion because, and that's something that Dave's usually pretty good at, is like creating pressure when there's not. And so if they can get better at getting after the quarterback and the secondary hits, I'm really high on Baylor. Even just talking about them right now,
I can see the excitement in your eyes.
I'm just like, I really think Baylor has a chance to be an excellent football team this year.
Yeah, Keaton Thomas led the team with 114 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. So you're on record as contending for the Big 12, and also Keaton Thomas plays 10 years in the NFL. Can we book it right here? Yeah,
I'm already in sweats over first-team All-State linebacker, because we have Anthony Hill, Torian York, Jacob Rodriguez, and Keaton Thomas.
Oh, it's such a loaded year for linebackers.
Back. And it's like, I got to leave one of those off into the second team. And Torian York, based off last year, would probably be the one that goes to second team. And the idea of putting Torian York as a second team All-State linebacker just doesn't make me feel good.
He's going to print that out and put it on his ceiling and do sit-ups.
Right, yeah, he's 100%.
Speaking of Torian York, here's some more bulletin board material for you. Who are you selling?
I'm selling A&M, and I'm not selling A&M and Mike Elko in the long term. I think year 3, year 4 of Mike Elko could be great. I think that they start competing for SEC championships. Like, I'm in on the Mike Elko tenure. I have always thought year 2 would be harder than year 1. There is Marcel Reed truly an elite quarterback that can go win you real SEC games.
I had that written down.
We don't know. But my fear is the defensive side of the ball, and this is weird saying this about a Mike Elko team. You're just not going to be better on the edges than you were last year. You're not going to lose Shamar Stewart, and you're not going to lose Nick Scorton and then be better defensively. That secondary really struggled. I mean, he ended the year being like, why can't we play zone? Like, and they've done some stuff in the coaching staff to fix that. But this is maybe a bigger conversation, but quietly the transfer portal isn't as talented as it was last year. There aren't Nick Scortons and Des Ricks and Will Lees in the transfer portal now. With revenue sharing, most of the teams around the country have been able to keep their best players. And so I don't know how they improve personnel-wise enough on defense to go from 7-8 wins to 9-10 wins.
Yeah, the headliner is cornerback Julian Humphrey from Georgia, who was basically benched and left the team before the college football playoffs. So a high upside guy, did play a lot at Georgia, but to your point, like, there's not maybe a huge star out there. So what do you think about their returning guys? Do you want to have the Marcel Reed conversation right now. Okay, he passed for over 200 yards in 4 of the last 5 games. He was great against USC, their defense. I wrote it down. Is he the answer? He was the answer last year for Connor Wegman, but this year?
I think it depends on what the question is. If the question is, can Marcel Reed lead Texas A&M to like an SEC title game, then I would say no. He's not that guy. But I do think he fits with what Colin Klein wants to do more. I think he could be an Avery Johnson type football player. Le'Veon Moss is going to be back. Amari Daniels, Reuben Owens. They have 4 out of 5 starters returning along the offensive line, and they're going to get their center back, Mark Naboo, that missed most of the season last year with injury. So in theory, they have 6 of their top 7 or 8 offensive linemen coming back next year, 3 of their best running backs. They added in the transfer portal at wide receiver, even though it doesn't look like Micah Hudson may be a part of that equation. Terry Bussey in year 2. Like, I can buy into the offense. Like, especially if he only has to throw the ball 18 times a game or something like that. Like, give me A&M kind of looking like Kansas State, running some like RPO stuff and just kind of being a read option type football team and pounding on people. But I don't know how you stop anybody defensively. And this isn't the old SEC where you're not going to find some offenses that can put points on you. Like, you're going to see some good football teams. And by the way, you have to go on the road to them this year. Like, Notre Dame was at home, LSU was at home, Texas was at home. Those are all road games. South Carolina is going to be even better. Auburn's going to be even better. So I just don't buy the jump. I don't think they're going to be 4-8 or anything like that, but I don't think we're going to see a year 2 jump from Mike Elko's team. If anything, I think their record might be worse than it was last year.
Not reporting anything here, but like, what's up with Micah Hudson? Like, what is there any notice on that, or like, do you like their receiver room if he's not there?
I think it's more likely than not he's not at Texas A&M, whether that is back at Texas Tech or taking a year off from football to figure some stuff out behind the scenes. Like, I'm not comfortable enough reporting that yet. But I do think the probability of him not being at A&M is very high. And so if you're Texas A&M, you have to go into spring and probably into the summer, assuming he's not going to be there. The good news, though, is Casey Concepcion's like a really good football player. Mm-hmm. I think he's going to be really good. They brought in a couple of wide receivers through the transfer portal, not named Micah Hudson. Craver, I think, is going to be...
Mario Craver, Mississippi State, was a slot guy.
Yeah, he's going to be productive. I think year 2 of Terry Bussey and some of those guys behind the scenes growing is going to help. But again, I think that they're going to rely less on the passing game. Like, I think they're going to be a 65-35 run the football team, try to play some solid defense. It's just that part of the equation that I keep getting stuck in. Like, I think the defense underachieved last year and is now less talented than it was. Mm-hmm. So unless the coaching and the discipline and just year 2 of figuring stuff out raises that level to offset it, I just don't know with that schedule how they win 9 games. And to me, that's going to be the getting to 9-3 is going to be how we judge Mike Elko. And if we're setting the over and under at 9 right now, I'm going under for sure.
So I know context will be everything, but if you're not expecting 9 wins, what's that mark of where you're saying we're expecting a bit of a drop down, but they can't get to like 5 and 7?
Yeah, they got to make a bowl.
They have to make a bowl. Okay,
you got to make a bowl.
That's fair.
You got to continue going to the postseason. You got to give those young guys more practices. You got to like not fall off the map. You got to go 7 and 5, 6 and 6. I mean, I think even 8 and 4. But I think a lot of times you expect more in year 2. I honestly think A&M is a worse football team in year 2 than they were in year 1, at least on paper in February. Mm-hmm. So that'll bring us to our last sell. I'm going to keep it in the Power 4, and I'm going with SMU, the reigning ACC runner-ups, college football playoff appearance, and similar to you, Craven, I'm not like selling all my SMU stock because I think long-term they're still going to be a great program. I think Lashley's doing an excellent job up there. I'm just taking a third off, maybe. I'm collecting some profit on this because I do the schedule game and I see they get Clemson and Miami next year. And I know I talked about earlier with Texas Tech, I'm not playing the schedule game because the Big 12 is worst to first all the time. I think we can assume Clemson and Miami. I mean, maybe we can't because Florida State was so bad last year. But like Clemson with Cade Klubnik back for his 5th year at this point. Miami, within the transfer portal, what they're doing. They're getting a better schedule next year. And then also just year 2 with Kevin Jennings. Like, how does he respond? We've seen the good Kevin Jennings. We've seen
Penn State, Duke, Kevin Jennings? Do teams have more film on him and say Penn State and Duke did stuff to him that we can replicate next year and put him in a bit of a sophomore slump?
What do you think SMU's best win was last year, now that we can look back on it? Who's the best team they beat?
Louisville?
I think it's Louisville or TCU. Mm-hmm. And the TCU team that they played was not the TCU team that closed the season. No. Going into next year, they are playing Baylor at TCU. They have Syracuse at Clemson versus Miami. They have Louisville again. Like, there's 6 teams that could be better than the best team they beat last year. I'm not saying that they go 6-6. I just don't see how with that schedule that you can replicate what you did last year, because it was a very small margin. I mean, remember the Duke game, and like, it wasn't like they were blowing everybody out. They had some hiccups along the way, and when they played a good defense, they turned the ball over and made the game closer than it should have been, or lost that football game. And so I do think the floor is getting raised on the talent, right? Like, it was a lot of G5 football players, guys that recruited to play G5 football, that helped SMU win last year, and they overachieved. I think this year is more of a coming back to earth, like regressing to the mean, and that could still be 8 wins. Like, it'd still be a good football team. But I'm also with you. If the premise is SMU is an ACC championship contender, I'm selling that as well. I would take Miami, Clemson, maybe even a team or two else other than SMU.
That SMU Baylor game is going to be awesome.
Oh man.
That's one of the early non-conference games. It might be one of the non-conference games of the year. Texas, Ohio State, SMU, Baylor, sneaky up there. We're going to have a fun month of September.
And then the week after that's A&M at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, and then the week after that, SMU's at TCU in what could be the last iron skillet in a long time. So we are going to know about SMU very quickly, just like we're going to know if I'm dumb about Baylor or not very quickly. Like, we're going to find out. I love those kind of like old school Southwest Conference, in-state non-conference games. Like, we need more of those. I think those are cool for recruiting and all that kind of stuff. But we are going to learn about all of these teams. Texas, like you mentioned, at Ohio State, A&M at Notre Dame, Baylor versus SMU. Like, very early on, there are some litmus tests for most of these teams. I think the team that we won't know about very early is Tech. Mm-hmm. They have nobody. They have nobody. If there is a time to start fast, it is now for Tech. Like, 2025, like, there is no excuses for them not to be 3-4-0 to start the season.
Yeah, you mentioned the recruiting with Baylor, SMU. It's kind of like the Keenan Hall Bowl, the running backs coach at Baylor.
Yeah.
It was at SMU.
I-35. There's a lot of recruiting going on between both of those schools right now. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
The other area of concern I have for SMU, and we just saw a lot of their former defensive linemen at the Shrine Bowl, Elijah Roberts, Jared Harrison, Hunt, but Tank Booker's gone too, guys. Jafari Harvey. These were all Power 4 defensive line transfers from Miami and Arkansas. I'm concerned with how they replace all those guys, and do they take a step back on that defensive front, which was so dominant and really was kind of one of the MVPs of what they were able to do in the ACC, them and Kevin Jennings, and Brashard Smith.
Losing Elijah Roberts, Jared Harrison, Hunt, huge along the defensive line also. But I think the biggest loss is on the defensive side of linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker.
I mean, that's a lot of production. That's a whole lot of production. Jonathan McGill on the back end, who does a lot of your setting of your defense and stuff. So you lose your spine, right? You lose a lot of the interior defensive linemen, Elijah Roberts on the outside. You lose both middle linebackers, and you lose kind of your quarterbacking, safety on the back end. Still love the secondary, but I am concerned about the front seven, even though I think Alexander Kilgore is going to be their next star.
So we kept it all Power 4 for the buy and sell. Let's just do a 5-minute G5 way into the future, what we're thinking about them this year. I think kind of selling the stock a bit in the G5 in Texas.
I'm selling the stock in the G5 in Texas. I think last year, it didn't materialize this way, but last year we entered the season thinking we had 2 schools that could compete for a college football playoff spot, the G5 spot. Texas State had a ton of buzz, added Jordan McLeod. UTSA had competed for championships, 3 previous seasons to that. So we just kind of figured they would keep it rolling. And neither one happened. UTSA, not very good. Texas State lost a lot of small, close margin football games.
Also a gross game, non-conference between them that we hyped up all year for that. Right. So maybe we shouldn't be hyping up all these non-conference games we have.
I think Sam Houston's going to take a step back. Obviously, Rice is in year 1. We'll see what UTEP is. My hot take in the G5 is I think at the end of the year next year, if I had to get on record in February, I think the best G5 program is going to be North Texas.
I think I just heard a call somewhere.
I think North Texas has, just because I trust the offense so much and I like the talent that they brought in along with Skylar Cassidy at defensive coordinator. UTSA feels like the easiest to trust just because of Owen McCown. Like at least they have a 3,000-yard passer, and at the G5 level, if you have a star, they're usually gone. Like I don't think that there is a single all-conference player at any of the G5 schools we cover that is back that had eligibility. They either went to the NFL draft or they transferred, and so I just it's getting harder and harder to project what the G5 is going to do. It's just about hitting in the portal. I think North Texas has the best chance to do that.
Yeah, those Sun Belt all-conference lists are starting to look like the sushi menu at a restaurant for those Power 4 teams. It's unbelievable what these Group of 5 programs have to deal with year in and year out.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that's why you're seeing more and more of these young football, young coordinators or coaches coming in from the FCS. Like the old school way was, you were a Power 4 coordinator, Power 5 coordinator, and then you took the head coaching job at G5, and then you won there, and then you became the Power 5. Like now, I don't think if you're a coordinator at the Power 5, you don't want to go to the G5, right? So like they're having to hire outside the box. I think it's how you get Phil Longo at Sam Houston. It's how you get a Scott Abel at Rice. It's how you got a Scotty Walden at UTEP. It's not the old school way anymore, and I think it speaks to the difficulty of being a G5 coach right now. It is not. I'm Mr. like coaches complain too much, right? You get paid a lot of money, deal with it. Like I'm not here to like wax poetic on. I mean, they're coaching football, right? We don't have to get too far into this, but it is a objectively harder job in 2024, 2025, the G5 level than it's ever been before.
Yeah. 100%. So that is our kind of off-season check-in with a lot of these teams buying and selling stock. We'll check back in August and see how off we were. Always one of my favorite things to pull up some receipts and see how we did there.
You can't do it last year. We crushed it last year. I've been looking back on that. Absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, well, you crushed it. I was kind of like the driver on the Titanic that was like, I was so wrong on UTEP and Sam Houston, but like the weighted average was great because you got them all right. So I was like, woo!
And like UTEP kind of underachieved a little bit. Sam Houston overachieved, so it ended up looking like it was pretty good.
Yeah, when you do nothing on the group project and get an A, that was what I was.
That was me forever. So it's nice to kind of be the other side of this thing.
Yeah, hey, still counts.
That's right.
We're 100%. For senior writer Mike Craven, I am Carter Yates signing off from the mothership in Louisville, Texas for probably the final time, guys, of the Republic of Football. But we'll be coming to you pre-recorded on StreamYard Wednesdays and Sundays during the season, Wednesday in the off season. For Mike Craven, Carter Yates, Dave Campbell's Texas Football signing off.